Hey, welcome everybody, and thank you so much for taking time to be with us today. We have a phenomenal turnout. It's so fun to see that so many people. We have literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. I think we're just under 1,000, and we made clear that during this webinar. So thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm Ben Peterson with BambooHR, and I'm on today with just some awesome HR experts to talk about culture and employee engagement. You know, we've worked with Glassdoor in the past, and to be honest, they are our favorites. They have such an awesome team, and they've been a great partner. We're really grateful for the incredible people there. It takes a lot of work, actually, to get these things done and to make sure they go smoothly and set up. Super grateful to be here with Glassdoor. Anyway, we love working with them to make HR better together. And also, FreshBooks is a customer of BambooHR, and AT&T is a client of Glassdoor. So it's obviously really special for us to have a close relationship with these terrific companies as well, and to have Nora and Jennifer here with us today. Before we get started, just a few quick housekeeping items. Please type in your questions throughout the webinar. We definitely want to answer everything we can, but during the presentation we're going to be going pretty quickly because there's a lot to cover. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the audio and slides will be sent out to you within the next few days or so. We're also going to be writing up summaries, all of our firms, so you can find those posted on our social channels, LinkedIn, Facebook, Google+, etc., and of course our blogs. So please engage with us on social media with #CompanyCulture. You'll see that at the bottom right corner of every slide. And just lastly, before we get started and I turn it over to Kirsten, listen, we really understand that HR is a balancing act. And we really know that you're all very, very busy. So sincerely, thank you very much for being here with us today. And Kirsten, go ahead.
All right, thank you. So I'm Kirsten Davidson. I head up employer brand here at Glassdoor. And my role here is really twofold. 50% of my time is spent working with clients and talking about employer brand in general in the industry. And the second part is helping us at Glassdoor build our own employee brand. So I do a lot of this work myself. I'm really excited to be able to ask some of these questions and to have a good discussion with these folks. So we just heard from Ben, CEO of BambooHR. I also wanted to share a few things he maybe didn't share, which is that he's also a columnist for Inc. magazine. He's a regular contributor on LinkedIn, and he focuses on business and HR topics. He's also been featured in Forbes, Entrepreneur, Time. He frequently gives webinars on HR-related topics, so he's quite the expert on these things. We also have Jennifer Terry Tharp, who is with AT&T. She's the Executive Director of Employer Branding, Marketing Technology. They have to lead strategies for employer branding and recruiting that bring in over 40,000 new hires each year. They have a pretty robust program, as you can probably imagine, through media, mobile, social media, diversity, recruiting programs, et cetera, et cetera. They're really focused on using technology to bring in a fantastic candidate experience. They've done some pretty amazing work. And then lastly, we have Nora Beatty, who is an HR business partner at FreshBooks. So she is really focused on helping her teams create thriving, innovative culture. And she's someone who's really passionate about delivering an extraordinary experience for employees. So I think she'll bring a really unique perspective as well for us. So let's go ahead and jump in to the next slide. Thank you. So the first question, how have you encouraged culture and employee engagement in your own company? Jennifer, let's start with you at AT&T. With such a massive audience and global company, how do you guys really focus on culture and employee engagement? How do you drive that in your company?
That's a great question, Kirsten. And I think that being from AT&T in a large company, we have some advantages, right? We have 139 years of history that tell us what our culture story is. We're innovators. We're people from all kinds of backgrounds. We were one of the first companies to employ women outside of the home, right? So for our whole existence, we've been a leader in this space. But as time has gone on and we've shown to continue to be a leader there, that means a lot from the big picture. But what I've found is especially marketing to candidates and helping candidates understand what it would be like to work at AT&T, candidates really want a more personal view of what culture and engagement looks like, not just in your company, but also in your work group. And so really a targeted effort around a variety of things, from featuring stories from actual employees to social activation to even encouraging Glassdoor ratings, right? I ask employees right from the very beginning, as soon as they're hired, I encourage them to promote their experience on Glassdoor, because I really believe that if we've done a good job setting up our culture of innovation and diversity, that everybody from day one will be able to share their story so everybody could see themselves in a large company like AT&T.
And I love what you said about, as such a large company, kind of driving it into the teams on which they're going to be working. I think that's a really smart strategy to help really manage through that. Ben, I'd love to hear your perspective for a company that's totally focused on delivering a great candidate experience and all about the people. How do you guys think about that for yourselves?
From a personal standpoint, it's really fun for me, frankly, because being the co-founder and starting the company with the intention of just creating a great place where people can come and grow. So for us from day one, just having alignment on what we wanted to be, how we wanted to behave, and making sure that it's a priority all the time. I don't think there's an employee here that if you ask them what the number one priority was at BambooHR, that would not say culture. And we guard it. We guard it aggressively. We communicated about it constantly. So almost every conversation, every meeting is how does this impact our culture? How does this impact our brand, strategic? Everything from product to strategy to hiring, everything is around how do we protect and grow? It's not just maintain, right? Yeah. Culture isn't this kind of this linear growing thing. It's just kind of this living thing that's really fun to kind of engineer. So I have a lot of passion around it, and it's a focus. We believe that people create value, businesses don't create value, and so a focus on the people and what that culture means to them is a key thing at BambooHR.
Yeah, I love that. At Glassdoor, we've always had such an amazing culture, and it's when you talk about how do you grow a culture, that's something that we're right in the middle of too, as we kind of do this global expansion, and it's not easy to think about how that translates. So I'd love to hear you say that. And now, Nora, I would love for you to share your perspective. You're in a unique role as an HR business partner. You kind of get right in there and help drive some of this on your teams. Tell me a little bit about how you guys do that at your company and kind of what your role is in that.
Yeah, so I think my role is twofold. I think there's definitely like a personal, so how have I personally encouraged culture myself, and the other is sort of more related to my role, which is in the advisory function. So I'm in this kind of cool position where managers are often coming to me and asking for advice on, how to deal with something that ultimately could impact culture, whether positively or negatively. They're dealing with difficult situations, they're dealing with employees day to day, and the decisions that they make about these situations can have a huge impact on our culture. So the principle that I sort of use for both of those is, it's going to sound a bit strange, but just kind of thinking about it from a human perspective rather than always coming at it from like, what would our culture dictate, just sort of thinking what would I want if I were on the other side of this. So any situation that I'm facing or any situation that a manager's facing, always encouraging people to remember that there's another person on the other side, and we want the decisions you make are reflective of what we stand for as a company, and that is reflective of who you are as a person at this moment. So just really encouraging managers to think that way and also living that out, especially as we get bigger. I think, not being tempted by canning answers and kind of trying to go quickly, not always thinking about each individual situation, but just trying to go quickly. It can be tempting to put together sort of like templates or canned ways of dealing with things, or, I don't want to like badmouth the word, but policies around these things instead of taking the time to think about, what's the right thing for this moment, for this person, for this situation.
People often talk about culture and feel like, what is culture? How do you define culture? And, what you're saying is just making me think that, the truth is it's people, and it's the interactions you have with people. So I think that's really powerful. So next question. Are we on there? This is one of my favorite ones, and I think it's a bit sticky. So who owns culture within an organization. So both, I think, maybe within yours, and then also maybe who do you think should own culture? Jennifer, let's start with you.
So interesting question. So I'm gonna. I love this one, right? So the answer is everybody. Everybody owns culture, right? But I also think that there needs to be stewards of culture, people that make sure that we're keeping it on the rails. And for the most part, it's our senior leadership team and also our HR team. But I think that one of the things that I found, I came from a smaller firm into AT&T early in my career. And in my previous company, we were a startup, and somebody owned culture. I mean, we had a culture advocate. And as I came into AT&T and mergers and acquisitions happened and we grew more and more, it became really apparent that it couldn't just be one person, and it couldn't just be left to grow and fester organically. Somebody had to keep it on the rails. So I think in my experience, ownership maybe is a loaded question, but I think that it's super important that regardless of if you give the task to a person or if you spread it across and have a shepherd or a steward, I think it's super important that your senior leaders own culture with their part of the organization's culture and that it's all aligned with the big picture.
Yep. Can't imagine how that must have been like going from a small little startup into AT&T driving this work. Quite a learning, I'm imagining.
It was a lot of fun.
Nora, how about you, where you are and where you sit?
I would say FreshBookers own culture. It definitely lives in everyone, but sort of slightly different from what Jennifer was saying. I wouldn't necessarily say that at FreshBooks we do it top down or even bottom up. We do believe everyone owns it, and that by keeping it that way, by not attributing it to a single person or a single group, I think the temptation sometimes with HR is that we are somehow the owners of culture. We're able to hold each other up through tough times. So if your culture is owned by a group or even a person, when they have a bad day or when they're going through a valley rather than being at a peak, it can be a scary thing if they're not living, if you don't see that culture piece day to day. They might be bogged down and it just becomes kind of a scary thing. Are we losing our culture? What's sort of happening? And it can demoralize people really quickly. But by having everyone as the owner of that culture, we can kind of support each other and hold each other up and encourage each other, and we ensure that it continues to live on despite, our own personal sort of missteps when it comes to that.
Yeah. Again, I love how you bring it back to kind of people's individual experiences. I think that's really powerful. Now, Ben, as CEO, we heard, I think, your passion right at the beginning. So at your company, I bet it's you, but what is your philosophy ultimately on who owns culture?
Yeah, I think I'd agree, and really liked the word that Jennifer used as far as stewardship and what that means. A couple months ago, so we've had some really fun growth. We've been really lucky, and so we've got several hundred employees now, and I worry all the time about the dilution of the communication and what it means. So as we create our mission and our vision and our values and our why. So I'll give you a specific example. So one of our brand values, one of our key culture pieces is assuming the best. So what does assume the best mean? What it means is that we assume everyone has good intent, right? We seek to understand, we seek to hear, and we seek to kind of act out of this really sincere desire to do what's best for the company, for our customers, and for one another. So if you have a situation where two people are working together and someone does something that's wrong or not with obviously with no intent, but they do something the wrong way, and so you see a mistake happening, and this mistake is just kind of recurring, and you think, oh well, I'm going to assume the best. I'm going to assume that they're trying to do things the right way. That's not what that means. It means we assume that they're doing things the right way, but it doesn't mean we can't call out when something's wrong. So in this instance, we also have promoted internally what we call our oops email, right? So when a mistake is made, that person can say, hey, I made a mistake, and they can share that with everyone. So it's this culture of saying, hey, we assume that everyone's going to do their best. We assume the best of what they're doing, but it doesn't mean mistakes aren't made, and it doesn't mean that we don't call them out. What it does mean is that we call them out in a certain way. And it does mean that we interact with each other, and the language that we use and how we do that is what's really important. And I worry all the time as we grow so quickly, because it's like, we have 100 people who haven't even been here for more than a year. How do we make sure that we communicate consistently all the time, so that this culture issue isn't just lip service, but it's something that's real and everybody feels it? And that's where that piece of stewardship comes in. So a couple months ago we had a meeting, and things pop up all the time, and I told the whole company, I said, look, Ryan, my partner and I, we started this company with a sincere desire to have quality of life and balance and do rewarding work and do hard things and help make other companies better. And that responsibility doesn't just fall on me. I can't carry it myself. Ryan can't carry it himself. HR can't carry it themselves. We all have to carry that. And so knowing that they're accountable and that they do have that stewardship is a real key. But again, I worry all the time about the communication and the words that are used that mean different things to different people. And I guess the key point would be that this is not easy, right? This is not a simple, hey, we're going to have a 5-minute meeting about this thing. It's this continual focus and deliberately engineering the way we talk to each other and the way we behave internally. And it's hard, and no one's perfect, and we're definitely not. But it's something that we think about all the time.
Yeah, I like how you guys have kind of examples internally that you talk about that help bring those points to life. A lot of times those things can kind of live on paper, and the way that things actually get done is quite different. So to set that example, right. I think is really key. So I'm
I just wanted to. Can I just point something out? We have over 1,000 people here now. This is phenomenal. We really appreciate everybody being here today.
It's amazing.
One big happy culture-focused family. I love it.
Yeah, that's what we say. The reality is a lot different, right? Or we wouldn't be here, I guess. Hey, just one quick other thought. Yeah. One other quick thought is, by the time it hits Glassdoor, it's too late, right? You miss something. So a lot of times we view culture and we view the behavior of HR and the behavior of management as very reactionary. The challenge is being proactive and having those conversations and including people in the culture and how it's set up, because it's different at every company, right? Everybody has to define what those things are, and that's frankly part of the fun and part of the engagement, to be honest.
I have two thoughts there. One is, I don't think it's too late. I hear what you're saying, though, is it's important to open up the internal channels so that the only place people have to go to talk about issues is Glassdoor. That's not what you want. You want to be able to handle it internally. However, I think sometimes Glassdoor can bring up and surface things that people maybe, even when there's open channels, aren't willing to talk about. But there's always the ability to kind of manage that conversation in a way that's very powerful, right? You can see the analytics, see where in the organization people aren't happy, so that you can do more of that work and be more focused. And that actually leads us to our next question. I think that was like a perfect setup, actually, which is, how does culture affect your hiring choices? So, for example, how do you hire for culture? But I think the really important piece is, how do you do that without discriminating? How do you do that in a way that welcomes diversity on all levels? So how do you manage culture versus making sure that you're also building for inclusivity? Let's start with Nora.
Yeah, so this was a really tough question, I have to admit. Articulating this was a bit challenging. I think, so the first thing around diversity, for us, we understand our culture as being a function of the incredible diversity we have at FreshBooks. So we don't see diversity as like a challenge for us. It's sort of something that we embrace and we see as a huge contributor to the kind of culture that we've created here. A big part of it is our differences. A big part of what makes us amazing is our differences. And so that kind of is a foundation or a first principle when we approach hiring. In terms of how we actually, how do you screen for culture, for example? How do you do those things? One of the ways is in doing well with hiring. So if you're hiring FreshBookers who live your values, who espouse what it really means to be a FreshBooker, who are champions of our culture, they're not going to be accepting of people who don't reflect that back to them. So, the better we are at bringing those people in and using them during our hiring practices, the more likely it is that we won't let somebody through, no matter how amazing their pedigree is, if they just don't kind of demonstrate the things we look for in in a FreshBooker. And I think the one really big thing that we do here as almost like a last gate is one of our founders still meets every single person that we hire or want to hire. And it's not a rubber stamp. I think it can be easy to sometimes when we say that to people, hey, you're going to meet one of the founders, they're like, right, so I've made it through. And it's like, no, not by a long shot. They're going to sit down and they're going to talk to you for the full hour. They're going to ask you tough questions. And they might say, hey, and they're really screening for culture. They're not looking for your technical skills. They're not evaluating your resume. They're really looking at you as a person and saying, how are you going to impact FreshBooks as a company and as a place to work and as a community if we bring you on? So I think that's really kind of how we focus on it.
Again, that personal touch, I think that's really impressive. Jennifer, I bet you have a very different story here, both, just given the nature of how big AT&T is, but also the amount of diversity just in the roles that you have from across the world. How do you do that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I was listening to Nora, and so a couple of things. I think that first you alluded to it, Kirsten. We hire everything in discipline, right, from the person in a retail store all the way up to, security cloud analysts, and the vast array is just sort of a different thing in and of itself. And as I mentioned earlier, I think part of the benefit to being a company with such an established history is that the culture is sort of known on the big scale. But really, I think that our opportunity and challenge comes in, and particularly in my role, right? I'm responsible for our employment value proposition and all of the things that do intake. It's how do you make sure that this very well-established culture is something that people can evaluate their fit for. I tease my team and I tell them we have to design a giant choose-your-own-adventure experience for our candidates, right? Because different things are important to different people at different points in their career and in their lives. And when you're in a large company where there's the opportunity to fit all of those things, it really starts even before they apply for the job or you're assessing them for a role or for a fit within a company. So it sort of starts at the does that make sense? It starts with the big picture. And then you have to get really specific, right? Because the culture of innovation and opportunity and learning is overarching. But how that's materialized for somebody who's a summer intern versus somebody who maybe starts out in a call center or a retail store, somebody that starts out as an HR professional, that looks a little different for everyone. And so I think it's very important that, and something that we pride ourselves on doing well, is telling the story so that everyone can choose their own adventure, but then following up with the appropriate checkpoints, right? In some cases, in high-volume jobs, it may be an assessment that looks for cultural fit. It may be sources. I tell the Glassdoor team all the time, I probably drive more traffic to the Glassdoor site by asking people to leave reviews than any other client they've ever seen, because I think it's really important. I think it's important at the interview stage and as an employee that you have a transparent outlet that adds to the greater good, right? So when the whole thing boils up together, you've got your choose your own adventure story, you've got assessments or interview questions from hiring managers that help confirm your fit, and we both go into the situation with eyes wide open, and we know that we're a good match for each other. It's not whether you're not a good match for me, it's whether or not we're a good match for each other.
Yeah, I talk a lot of times to clients who, get concerned about maybe a negative review or feeling like it's not accurately reflecting everything. But I always tell them it's okay. People aren't looking for perfect companies. They're looking for the right company for them. And the more that they can see kind of good, bad, and ugly, they come in eyes wide open and potentially even ready for solutions that can help the organization versus just a mindset of like, oh, how I'm going to benefit from this great place, but kind of shifting it because people want to be able to add value.
Yeah, we're dating, right? We're dating during the decision process, and at the end, if you decide to work here, I mean, this hopefully will be one of the top 5 moments in your whole life. I want us to have got to know each other well. I think that's super important, and I didn't want to walk away without Kirsten just giving a little bit of just color on the diversity topic. Mm-hmm. For us, diversity is core to our employment brand, and it's core to who we are as a company. So I think that fits. So like Nora was saying, that sort of helps the whole. But I think that as you're transparent, if you have issues in those areas, those will be called out very quickly, and it will be important that you act and have good plans for that.
Yep. So I want to move on to the next question, which is, how do you measure employee engagement and culture? And I feel like this could be a whole hour webinar just on its own of how you measure it. So as you think about your answer here, I want you to think about what is the metric that you most use kind of personally and that you report on that most reflects kind of where things are at for you. And Ben, let's start with you on this one.
Yeah, I think I've got kind of an unfair advantage because we actually have a tool that we use, so our performance module. And there's really, it's kind of interesting the types of software that are out there. So we launched one about 1.5 years ago after, frankly, a couple of years of really taking a look at what BambooHR could do strategically to have an impact, because we've got the kind of the operational and the transactional HR functions taken care of. And once those are taken care of, HR is kind of free to focus more on culture and on employee engagement. So the purpose of our performance was simply to create a conversation between managers and employees around their, frankly, specifically their engagement. And at the same time, taking off this kind of this bonus, this typical, hey, usually you sit down, we're gonna have a conversation about your performance and your engagement, and there's this stack of money on the table, and so it becomes this game. And we wanted to remove that element. So there's really 2 key questions that help us to map whether or not our employees are engaged. And the first one is, what would you do if this person got a job offer to go work somewhere else? And the responses are like, I would do anything I could to keep him. I would wish him well. Maybe we'd have a conversation just to determine how valuable that person is to the organization from the perspective of the manager. And then the second question is related to how engaged they are. So if you have a rock star who's unengaged, then there's something wrong, and you're in danger of losing just a super valuable person. And so just inviting that conversation. So that's one way. The other way that we do, frankly, is just looking at NPS, so Net Promoter Score and customer satisfaction. We look at all of our reviews. Obviously, we look at Glassdoor. We look at the comments that are made there. So we're watching all of these elements. And then, of course, there's the intangible. And just watching really closely for elements of any toxicity whatsoever. And again, it's so interesting to me. I think the number one challenge of all companies everywhere is simply communication and having clarity. And that's a two-way street. So that's, anyway, internally the way we measure with the tool related to our performance module. And then, again, it's hard to measure the intangibles around culture. And some of it, frankly, is a feeling and just paying attention to it and making sure that employees are always welcome to be open and to discuss it. So that's how we do it.
Nora, how about you as an HR business partner, or either just for you personally, kind of how you measure that on your teams, or as an organization if you maybe have something in place where you look to help monitor and measure and reflect back where you're at as a culture?
Yeah, so just echoing a little bit of what Ben said, we do it sort of in 2 ways. One is formal and one is informal. Formally, we do an annual survey, which we are actually just in the midst of doing right now. So it's like 29 rating questions and then 3 open-ended questions. And the questions are really directed at understanding like where's everybody's head at, and where are we doing amazing and we need to double down as a company, and where's our blind spot? What have we not realized is affecting our employee base, but actually is? And we do a lot of analysis with that survey. So we look at it year over year. We check trends. We make sure that we echo back to employees after we do the survey everything that we heard, and we tie all of our activities over the course of the year. If we ever do anything related to the survey, we make sure that they know that this is because of the feedback that you folks all provided. And I think that's kind of a key part of actually it's sort of an interesting loop, because while the survey helps us measure engagement, it also helps us drive it, because when people feel like they give that feedback and we actually take actions as a company because of it, they are certainly more engaged because they feel like they have a say, and they're more likely to be open and honest with us. And this year we've kind of put in place a bunch of post-survey activities to help us keep that level of engagement, that focus on culture and engagement up. So I would say that's how we do it formally. On an informal basis, our office, very fortunately for someone in my position, is super open. So it's like it's a loft. You just walk around, you can see everybody at all times. And one of the kind of benefits of that is if someone appears down for any reason, especially if it happens over a long period of time, people start to notice. And I think for me, one of the things that I do personally and certainly encourage a lot of managers to do is just to speak up. If you see somebody who doesn't look like things are kind of okay, just check in with them, because sometimes, yep, they're going through something personal at home. They just need a little bit of space. They're human, and we all go through that. But other times, stuff's going on in the organization, and that's how you find out about it, is just by sort of talking to people, sitting down at the lunch tables in our cafeteria with teams that aren't necessarily yours, and just having those conversations with people, going for walks at lunch with people that you don't necessarily work with. It helps you keep a pulse on what teams are doing well, what the problems they're facing are, if they're challenged, if they're stimulated, if they're bored or confused. Yeah, I think those would be the two ways we kind of keep an eye on things.
Okay. Jennifer, our heavy hitter from AT&T with the big company, I bet you guys have a pretty serious process in place, but I'd love to know if there's kind of one main metric that you look at. What is it, and how do you measure that?
Sure. So we do the traditional employee engagement survey every other year. But what we do that's really interesting, and Ben touched on it here just a second ago, is twice a year we do a pulse survey based on Net Promoter Score with just 2 questions: willingness to recommend AT&T as a place to work, and willingness to recommend AT&T's products and services.
So true NPS, inside and out.
Yep, inside and out.
That's awesome. Right. This one's a little tough. And, of course, no one there on the line has a toxic environment. So I know you guys don't have to worry about our 3 speakers, obviously. I say that a little tongue-in-cheek because everyone has things they need to work on. But what do you say to people maybe who have a toxic environment in their culture who are on this line and who are responsible for fixing it, but maybe doesn't have a management team on board that wants to change it or cares a whole lot? What's your advice to them? Jennifer, let's start with you.
Sure. So I think that there's a lot of benefit in a groundswell. And one of the things that we have found is that nobody wants to be a Debbie Downer, right? Like everybody, especially in a work environment, you would prefer to be a polypositive. And so one of the things that I recommend is that if getting leadership on board is not in the cards, to create a groundswell, implement a hashtag campaign. We have a hashtag Life at AT&T. It makes me happy every day to log on and to see how engaged employees are. And sometimes we defer to sort of the negative reviews it's good to see people want to be positive. And I think that if you create a groundswell and you show your leadership team, people are happy. There isn't a lot of risk here. If we can multiply this, it will squelch the bad side. I think it sort of starts to help shift the continuum.
I'm so glad to hear you say that. One thing I talk a lot about is there's always things that you need to fix, and it can be really seductive just to kind of focus on that and swirl around the drain on it. But there's also always things that are working. And so how do you I love your idea of that groundswell piece and really focus on things that are working and help lift it up. Ben, in your position, I know, at your company and as you guys work with other people, what's your advice to somebody who is concerned about their toxic culture, doesn't have a management team that's on board to change it?
I got to be really careful what I say here, because I think that this is the number one most frustrating thing for me. I just want to shake them. So have them call me, and I'll take them out behind the woodshed and give them a whooping, because it is so infuriating to me to hear the lip service that companies will give. Oh, our people are the most important thing, and then they behave in ways that show that their priorities are very selfish. And I would just, this sounds horrible, I would suggest giving them a copy of this webinar, just burying them with the data around culture, because it is so overwhelming. The actual real dollar impact of positive culture, whether it's growth, whether it's revenue, whether it's retention. I mean, you think about the intangible costs of employee turnover. I mean, there's comments out there or data out there that says it's 2 times their salary, 3 times their salary, et cetera. It is so much more expensive than that. So it's just foolish, even from a strictly looking just at the dollars only that some of these guys do. It's just foolish to look at it that way. And the benefit of having that conversation, having them change their minds is huge. And in some cases, in fact, frankly, I got an email from a longtime client. In fact, really, really early on, I think that this company was one of our first 100 clients, and we've got thousands now. But she left. The CEO had changed, and she tried as hard as she could to change the way. I mean, this CEO didn't want to have exit surveys because he just said that the people would complain, and he didn't want to hear it. And she's gone. So in some cases, you got to go to a place where you're going to thrive, where there is that alignment of culture. And I definitely agree with Jennifer as far as making the effort to lead from where you are, which is one of Bamboo's values, right? Lead from where you are and try and influence change the right way from where you are. And there are these pockets inside of these toxic companies that just thrive and that seem to do really well and carry the rest of the company. And to try and generate a kind of a contagious reaction to that internal pocket of goodness would be something that I would focus on. But the reality is you have to be open. You have to be able to have those hard conversations and say this is important, not just to us but to everybody. And here's how it's impacting. It's not just me saying it, it's the whole world. So let's get on board and do everything you can to influence culture, because I truly feel that no other aspect of the business is going to impact its success more than culture.
Yes, to that point, Sheryl Sandberg at Facebook says if you're not having at least 2 tough conversations with your team every week, there's probably stuff going on that you need to address. So good timing for that. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next one, which is how do you communicate your culture internally and externally? And Nora, I'd like for you to take this one first.
Sure. So I think externally, I have to be honest, we find this a little bit, or I personally, I guess I should say, find this a little bit challenging. I think that there can be a lot of temptations around how to characterize your culture externally. Like, we have a beer fridge and ping pong and video games and dogs are allowed and it's so wonderful. Right. I think that can be really tempting, and I think it's a gross mischaracterization of what makes FreshBooks amazing. I think that you can have a company that has all those things and it stinks to work at. So I think, especially when we have opportunities to talk to people really directly about what really makes our culture, through the hiring process and things like that, we do it by talking about things like what our mission really is and how jobs actually, serve that mission. So I've certainly worked at other places where we had like a sort of broad company or team mission, and it just didn't seem like my job or the product we were selling or whatever the case may be actually synced up to that. But showing that, like, hey, our mission is a part of our culture. It certainly is reflective of our culture, and our jobs, the product we sell, everything that we do here is in service of that mission truly, and we can demonstrate that. So, sharing those kind of bits to people when we have that interaction. Internally, like, it's organic. We don't really have formal communications around culture. In fact, I think sometimes culture loses, the word itself is very sort of ambiguous internally. We mean a lot of things by it, but we really look to people. We have like our values plastered on the staircase. Our acronym is PorchFest, and each one of the PorchFest values is there. You walk by it every single day when you're coming up through the kitchen. But I think we try to live it as an organization more than talk about it. And I don't mean that to be like cheesy or cliche, but really, like, we don't want platitudes. We don't want people to just reference these values in an empty way. We want people to actually live them. So when you're making decisions, when you're interacting with your coworkers, when you're putting through your work, does it actually live up to these things that we say we espouse?
Yeah, I love that. Glassdoor research shows that the number one driver of satisfaction among employees is mission and values. So I think it's really wise what you're talking about. It sometimes can feel like what I call a perk off. But remembering to really ground it in the work and how the work gets done and how people relate to each other is absolutely key, and the data shows that.
I think this is a slightly tangential, but one thing that we worked on this year is revising all the job descriptions, and we have these performance matrices that we use for people, and instead of talking about we try to base everything in missions for people so that when we're talking about roles internally, when we're talking about roles externally, we're really talking about, again, our culture. This is the mission that reflects our culture for your specific role.
I love that. Jennifer, I'd love for you to take this one, but from my perspective, I'd be really interested to know, how do you do that on a global level? Do you take it, when you talk about culture, do you look at when you communicate it at the top AT&T level, or let's say in Germany or in France, do you drive it down into the more local levels and they kind of do their own? And even in maybe engineering versus marketing, how much of it is the overall story versus how much work do you do to kind of split that up and make it relevant at a more granular level when you communicate it?
Great question. So it's both, right? So there's the overarching tenets that are the power of and. We do great things together, and we serve our communities, and there's lots of opportunities. There's sort of that overarching that is everybody's, but every single work group sees themselves differently in the overall value proposition. So that ranges in task for me from a group of representatives in Bratislava to part-time retail employees in the United States, right? So they all opportunity is core to everyone and diversity is core to everyone. But what that means to a part-time retail associate is different than what it means in Mexico City, for example. And so one of the things that I think is most important here for us is ensuring that our message is hyper-aligned and not telling our own stories, but lifting up the stories of others that represent the point. Right? You won't see a lot of narration from my team or copy or those sorts of things in videos. You won't see a lot of really produced things that you might expect from a large company like AT&T, but instead you will see employees telling their own stories on their iPhone. Right, so that you really get and understand that this is us, inside and out, we are transparent.
I think that's a hard thing to do, I would imagine, at a massive company, to sort of push back that desire maybe to have everything be perfect and polished, but to let that authenticity through. So imagine that wasn't an overnight thing for you.
It was not, however, I will say that back to my sort of crowdsourcing thing, right? By crowdsourcing some of that from the get-go and us seeing how wholly positive and helpful it was, it allowed us to dispel some of the fear, right? And it allowed us to also proactively do things like ask for our Glassdoor reviews, ask for employees to leave videos or testimonials. There's less fear about that hashtag.
I love it. So I'm going to the next question, and Ben, I want to start with you on this one because your role in the service that you guys provide. What do you think of millennials who are entering the workforce, and what does that mean for employee engagement strategies, both for your own? What do you see from other companies? Maybe how is it changing, or what are people doing to address that? Let me know your thoughts there.
Great question. I read an article, definitely within the last year, but I read, anyway, I lose track of time sometimes. But recently there was an article in the Wall Street Journal that talked about the need for companies to create new roles for the millennials because they like these quick hits where they're in a specific role for a short amount of time and then they need to go to another role and then they need to go to another role. And I thought to myself, that just does not make any sense to me. So I'm a little bit contrarian in some ways around millennials. I feel like what's good for millennial is frankly good for anyone as far as career development and growth and learning and what they can become. And I love the idea, and actually Jennifer used this word as far as transparency. I love how millennials want transparency. There are generations that aren't as comfortable with that, aren't as used to that, and I think it really invites speed, where that transparency facilitates rapid communication and allows us to overcome barriers more quickly because we're communicating more openly. And so, these millennials entering the workforce, I just see it as a real opportunity to kind of reset any expectations that they might have that are off, especially around the entitlement generation and things like that, where we can say, hey, this is what it's like here. Let me share with you what your career path is going to be here. I realize that you want to be a manager when you start, but here's who the managers are, and here's how they become those managers, and share those values of hard work, being open, transparency, growing, etc. And so I look at millennials entering the workforce and just a huge desire to have them come and enjoy and be a part of what we have. But I really don't think that creating new roles and just kind of changing the whole organization to fit them is the right way. I think that it should be just the right principles inside of the company that everyone maps to. And I do think that you need to adjust the way you communicate and make sure that their satisfaction, their needs might be a little different. I do think that we talk about those things, and we make sure that they're comfortable and that they're in an open environment. But at the same time, it's hard work. Hey, we're here to work hard, and that hard work is what engages us, and it's what makes us happy. And communicating that to them and how they can really add value is important. So anyway, those are kind of how I look at it.
Nora, from your perspective, and you're working with millennials or the integration there, and as you guys outreach, what are your thoughts? Do you have any differing perspectives, or how do you feel about what Ben said?
Yeah, actually, I agree with largely everything Ben said. We actually have a lot of millennials. I'm a millennial, I think, technically. So it's not really something that we've always had to deal with this. It's been sort of part of who we were from the very beginning. I think that one thing we try to do, and I think this echoes a lot of what Ben said, is not to dismiss them. So I think millennial bashing, if you listen to the radio or BNN, frankly, it's kind of easy and plentiful. But I think we're missing out on a lot of stuff when we don't take them seriously. And I think that, I really liked what Ben said about from a career development perspective, from a learning perspective, from all of those things, what's good for millennials is really the same thing that's good for everyone. It's just the way that they articulate it sometimes looks differently. So being really clear about our expectations with them. I think one thing that we found people really just couldn't handle was not having a clear path. So it wasn't so much, I think we mischaracterized them as wanting promotions really, really quickly. But we found that once we started to tell them yep, got it, you want to be, at this level in 3 years, that's great. Here's how you get there. We're not going to put a timeline on it, but we're going to help you. All of a sudden those, that crazy urge to get promoted 5 days after they got their last promotion went away. It was they were calm, they knew what direction they were going, they had a path, and we were supporting them through it. So, taking them seriously and trying to understand the sort of heart of what it is that they're asking for, rather than, dismissing them as saying, they're entitled or I don't get them or whatever the case may be.
And Jennifer, how about for you guys at AT&T? Sure, you have, over 140 years of experience of this, having new generations come in. How much do you alter strategies and conversations versus sort of folding them into the overall structure?
I think that you maybe present those opportunities in a different way, right? We talked about being more transparent. We report, you decide. But it's interesting. When you think of a company as big as AT&T, over 25% of our employee base is millennial. So just by putting in that strategy of you report, we report, you decide, it really helps make sure that there's a transparent view and that we're a good fit, right? Again, we're dating and we're getting ready to get job married. So I think it's super important that you continue to make sure that your base reflects what you're looking to attract and that you provide a consistent and transparent view from that group. Is that surprising that we're over 25% millennials? I thought that was a little surprising.
That is for the fact that you're 140 years old.
Yep.
For as many people as you have. So we have one more question that I want to just get under the wire here, but I also want to leave time for questions from the audience because we have like pages and pages, and it would be good to get to a couple of those. So I want you guys to just answer this one as quickly as you can, but I think it would be good to hear your advice, which is what advice do you give to someone who's just starting to pay attention to engagement or prioritizing it? And think about if someone could start, where's the one place you recommend them starting? Jennifer, let's start with you.
Okay, I'm going to be really succinct because we're short on time. So I think my advice would be that you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Listen twice as much as you talk. And I think that'll help hone in on where your opportunity is. And if you could only do one thing, I think that the sort of where do you get started piece is to give at least a single non-company outlet for at least monitor those non-company outlets for what your employees are saying to help focus your priorities.
Awesome. Nora?
I'll echo what Jennifer's saying. Ask people. Find out where your people are. If you're just starting to think about it, make sure you know where people stand. Find out from them what it is that they're missing and what they are loving. So however you want to do that, a survey, go for coffee with people, get a team, a task force involved, whatever you need to do, find out how your people are doing. And then I would say, like, once you start, avoid being too prescriptive. So don't tell people what the culture is going to be like. Really try to think about, like behaviors and initiatives that are going to help get you there rather than telling people, okay, now our culture is about integrity or something kind of cliched like that.
And Ben, I'm going to let you close us out with your answer here.
Yeah, just to, frankly, Jennifer and Nora were perfect. The one thing that I would point out would be the importance of not being a copycat. Like, culture has to be authentic to you. And we get all these reports of best practices, and we read them and we think, oh, we've got to do this. But it's really the principles in those best practices that matter most. So don't be a copycat. Pay the price to do it right and make sure that you can define it. We've got a brand book. Having it written down so that everyone can clearly understand what that is important too. But yeah, be authentic and don't be a copycat. Make it your own so that it's real and everyone senses that. Employees know when it's BS. Everybody knows when it's BS. So you can't fake this. So just do it right. But do it for sure. Make this a major effort. That's definitely what I would do.
I think that's a great moment to end on. Regardless of what you do, it doesn't really matter. Just start. Start somewhere and just do it, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yep, for sure.
All right, well, let's see. We have, like I said, sort of pages and pages of questions here. So we're going to start to just kind of pick out a few. And maybe, Ben, I'm going to have you take this one. And it's, what are some best practices to increase trust in the culture? I think that's a good one because trust is such an important pillar. As a CEO, what would be your recommendation there?
Do what you say you'll do, and you got to have, again, employees can tell when it's BS, so you have to genuinely care. So when you don't do what you say you will do, you just erode that trust for sure. And a lot of times we love the ideas of employees. In fact, there's this myth, right, that you think you're going to hire people and you're going to have less work to do. When you hire bright people, it creates more work because they're so talented and add so much value. You're just going to grow and grow, and it's going to require more and more of an effort to stay focused. So we'll have people come in and say, hey, I've got this idea or that idea, and we really need to take the time, frankly. It takes a lot of time to sit down and say, thank you for the input. This is where this falls in our priorities, and I don't want you to feel like you're not heard or that we're not acting on this. And if there is something you need to act on, then act on it. And this is something, if it's toxic now, you can't change that overnight. And it's just kind of an uphill battle sometimes. So that's how I'd answer that one.
Great. Jennifer, I'm going to give you this next one because it's a good one on diversity. And it's how do you create an inclusive company when there's a lot of diversity? So people who speak different languages, who really come from very different cultures, that maybe limit how they would interact or limit participation in conversations, how do you build and kind of design for inclusivity?
That's a great question. And I always sort of tongue-in-cheek say, well, it's easy, and is my middle name, right? AT&T. And I think it goes to that place that is developing methods of interaction, ways of communicating, and groups and structure around being inclusive, right? Employee resource groups. In other countries, we maybe even have some other types of affinity groups, so that you can really, so that you not only have a place where you feel community at work, but also the consistent effort of making work feel like community.
I love that, and really driving that community aspect of it.
Absolutely.
All right, so there was a question about Glassdoor reviews. There's actually quite a bit about Glassdoor reviews, how to manage negative reviews, how do I get people to respond. But real quickly, how do you guys engage employees to leave reviews or to provide feedback, whether on Glassdoor or other things? Is that done at like a mandate level? Do you try to drive that down to a more manager level? What is your strategy to get people to engage?
I do it a lot, so I'm glad to go first. This is Jen, and I ask at every natural opportunity. If I send out an email, which I send out millions asking for employee referrals, it's part of that email is asking employees to go leave a Glassdoor review. We have targeted booths at our annual employee resource group conference. We really go out of our way to help our employees understand the importance to our talent continuum leaving a review is. And to that end, Kirsten, I think you could see like we have tons of reviews, almost double that of our competition.
You're pretty amazing. You're like a ninja over there, I think. And then since you took the question and answered about Glassdoor, Nora, I'd love for you guys to talk about how FreshBooks has used BambooHR and what you use that for, and what you guys have learned and how you're implementing that.
Yeah, we love Bamboo. We think it's fantastic. I think, so why we love Bamboo, I think, speaks to how we use it. We don't want HR to be transactional. We want HR to be, like Ben said, we want HR to be free to help support managers and leaders in initiatives that drive employee engagement, that keep people satisfied and happy and stimulated. So, and Bamboo really lets us do that. It makes HR like streamlined, crisp, simple, clean, all those wonderful things. I feel like I'm kind of being an ad for them right now. I'm not meaning to be. This is really sincere. They just, everything about Bamboo allows us to, the software does so much for you that you're not worried about, did I enter this person in correctly, and did this change get captured and sync with this other thing? It's so streamlined and intuitive that HR is able to focus on, we can have one person, managing the administrative work for the entire company, and it's only about 10% of her job at the moment because Bamboo makes things so simple. It also makes the information really accessible. So if a manager is like looking for a piece of information, it's not, coming to us and it's behind 3 different walls. It's just there for them. If they're at home, if they're in the office, if they're on the road, they can have access to that information. So again, it frees HR up from having to answer sort of these like administrative questions about every employee, and instead we're working with managers on these larger, more strategic initiatives.
All right, one last question. It says we're right at time. If each person can answer it with one word, that's my challenge to you. Ben, I'm going to have you go first. The question is, why does culture matter? One word.
Happiness.
Nora?
People.
Jennifer?
Oh, she stole my word. Diversity.
Diversity. Well, I think that's a really beautiful note to end on. I want to really thank the panelists, first of all, for participating today. We've had well over 1,000 people attend, so clearly this is a hot topic that a lot of people are struggling with, excited about, and devoting a ton of time to. So thank you for that. I also really want to encourage you guys, check out AT&T, FreshBooks, BambooHR, see what they're doing on Glassdoor, see what they're doing for their employer brands. They're doing some pretty amazing work. Check out their products. And then all of us, I think, are really passionate about what we do. So there was a lot of questions that came through. Feel free to follow up with us. We love to be in contact and continue the conversation.
Hey, real quick, Kirsten, just so everyone knows as well, Glassdoor has amazing content and a ton of research because these things matter. So does BambooHR. And just know that our teams, we're probably going to reach out to you. Please be nice to us. We do have things. Have hard questions ready. Glassdoor, with all the research and data that they have, they can really teach us and help us to be better. And we can do the same thing. So when our teams reach out to you guys, have some hard questions around some pain you're experiencing, and we'll see how our experts can help you out. So thanks.
Wonderful. Well, I hope everyone has a fantastic day. Good luck going back to your people. Happiness matters, right? Culture matters. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.